So I think we started, right? Okay. So welcome to the webinar series, The Experiences of the Kurdish Women's Movement. This is a project of the network Women Weaving the Future, and it is live streamed on their YouTube channel, Women Weaving Future. And the panelist today, our guest is Nazan Üstündağ. She is a sociologist. And Nazan Üstündağ received her PhD in 2005 from the sociology department at Indiana University, Bloomington. Between 2005 and 2018, she worked as an assistant professor at Boğaziçi University in the Department of Sociology. Between 2018 and 2020, she was affiliated with the Transregionale Studien in Berlin as an Academy in Exile and IIE Scholar Rescue Fund Fellow. And currently she's receiving a fellowship from Gerda Henkel Stiftung, Patrimonies Program. Her most recent articles appeared in the journal South Atlantic Quarterly, History of the Present and Differences. She has also worked as a columnist in the journal Nokta and the newspaper Özgür Gündem. And her opinion pieces appeared in venues such as Bianet, T24, Raw Magazine, and Jadalia. Üstündağ is a member of Women for Peace and Academics for Peace. Most recently, she is finishing a book manuscript with the working title Mother, Politician and Guerrilla: The Emergence of a New Political Cosmology in Kurdistan Through Women's Bodies and Speech. And today, as our panelist, she will present on the subject, the relationships between organization and freedom. And by this, I give you the floor, Nazan, and I'm looking forward to your speech.
Thank you for your introduction. I'm really happy to be part of this webinar series. I'm really happy that you guys are doing this because it is really important to build an archive for the knowledges we produce as women. And it's really important to build an archive, I mean, by finding new avenues and spaces to think about philosophical questions. Because, for example, a question like freedom, as much as it is considered to be a political question, unfortunately has remained outside of the reach of women in terms of discussing freedom, because we are violently excluded from departments of philosophy in academia, from political leadership, etc. So I find this webinar series and all the discussions that have happened until now very valuable. I would like to start with that. And then I should maybe give you an outline of what I will try to do today. I'm going to start with how freedom has been defined in liberal societies, and especially in the philosophical tradition of liberal thinking. And then I will move to the crisis that now we are facing with this definition. This definition cannot anymore work, cannot anymore function, cannot anymore encompass the demands that are emerging from the oppressed people. And also it has been confiscated. The concept of freedom has been confiscated by the forces of the emerging right, the growing right in the world. So I will talk about those crises a little bit. And then I will move to the Kurdish women's movement's definition of freedom, especially how Abdullah Öcalan has defined it, and how then women, I mean, in response to women's struggles, and how now a more or less definite understanding of freedom exists in Kurdish women's movement. And I'm hoping that at that point, you will, I mean, the audience will interfere and enrich this discussion with their questions. Okay, so, well, how is freedom defined, and what is freedom and how can it be achieved? Freedom is not something that is given. First of all, we have to understand that, because we always ask, when we say what is freedom, we always also add the question of how can it be achieved? It's not given to us, and there are always constraints to our exercise of freedom. And this question, what is freedom, has been a political and philosophical question since the times we know it. I mean, for example, in myths, in mythologies that have been handed down to us, we always see this question of what is freedom. The whole story of oh my God, I forgot his name. The guy, okay, the person who, the mythological figure who steals the fire from gods and gives it to people. Prometheus, of course, Prometheus. Yeah, I forgot. For example, the whole mythology of Prometheus asks the question of what freedom is, what can you do, and how will God respond to you when you exercise your freedom. So, and of course, after that, in the turn of modernity in 19th century, these questions have started. This question of what is freedom has started to be handled in rational thought. So, as a philosophical question and as a political question, as something on which rational knowledge can be built. And what we have now is, if you want, a particular definition of freedom that is hegemonic. I want to stress that this is a particular definition of freedom. This is the liberal definition of freedom. It's not natural. It's not like given, but there is a whole struggle. And there is a whole domination of thought that informs this definition. And it is basically as the ability to do what you want to do. It is having a free will, so wanting something or wanting to achieve something and being able to pursue that goal, being able to exercise your free will. That is basically how now freedom is defined in liberal thought. And more importantly, freedom is individually defined. That is, freedom is understood to be individually possessed and practiced. And such an understanding, defining freedom as the ability to do what you want to do, to have personal and individual autonomy, has of course also shaped how we relate, how individuals, how communities, how people relate to the thought of organizations and structures. Organizations and structures have been perceived as sometimes necessary entities and necessary formations that yet nevertheless always limit freedom. So a conception of a dilemma informs our understanding of freedom. That is a dilemma between our freedom, between our wishes, our will, and our moral, communal, and legal obligations as restrictions. So each individual is responsible for achieving a balance at the subjective level that addresses this dilemma. So where does my freedom begin? Where does my freedom end? How can I exercise my freedom without harming the society? Or how can I exercise freedom within legal restrictions, so that by exercising my freedom, I am not conceived as criminal? So these have been questions, and I'm sure you can multiply those questions. These has been questions that emerged around the idea of freedom. Of course, this understanding of freedom enables certain actions, but on the other hand, makes other forms of action unthinkable. And for example, how does it open up venues for action? How does it empower the individual to pursue rights? Well, for example, women or other oppressed groups say, you know, we cannot do what we want to do because there is an inequality of freedom. That is, we are not all free the same way. So what we want is that each group, each individual has the same kind of freedom. For example, as an LGBTI plus individual, I can say, I should have the right, I should have the freedom to love whoever I love. Why can heterosexual people, you know, display and perform their acts of love and their emotions and their affects, and can be accepted as they are in society. But when there is a same-sex love involved, then you have to hide yourself, you cannot pursue your freedom, etc., etc. So the whole struggle of people informed by this definition of freedom has been, how can we be equal in terms of our freedom, which is then translated into rights and recognition. So let's have equal rights, let's fight for equal rights, let's have our different wants and needs be recognized by society and by law, and that will give us the infrastructure for being free. Well, as I said, this understanding has worked for a while, or still works to some extent, but there are now important dilemmas and urgent dilemmas. I mean, they are not philosophical dilemmas, they are political, right now, important dilemmas that this definition has, or that the use of this definition has given birth to. One is definitely the way in which this idea of freedom has been confiscated, has been robbed from oppressed people, and now how the right, how the dominating sections of society, how men, for example, use this idea. For example, I will give you 3 examples. I think they are very important examples, and we don't know necessarily how to fight against this confiscation, how to respond to this confiscation. For example, when people say, okay, there might be corona, but no, it is restricting my freedom if you punish me for not wearing a mask, because I have the right to wear whatever I want to, right? I mean, we see in the US especially, but also we have witnessed this in Germany and other places of Europe, where people come and say that it is their right not to protect themselves or others from corona, because wearing masks is a restriction to how they look, to how they experience their body, etc. Or restrictions on mobility that is now being exercised by nation states, because we have been fighting for such a long time for freedom of mobility, and suddenly now it is the people from the right saying, open the borders, open the trade routes, open up everything, so there will be consumption and there will be freedom. So this is one area, for example, where this the dilemmas or the crisis of this concept, of the concept of freedom, appears and becomes important for our lives. Another one is, for example, the right to exercise hate speech, right? A lot of people are saying, I say what I want to say, as long as I don't harm other people, I can use racist language. But can you? And there is a whole, debate surrounding this, because other people are saying, talking hateful is actually not freedom of opinion, but it's an act. It's not, it's not being autonomous, it's not doing what you want to do, but it's an act that harms. And rights in response say, well, you talk, bad about men, you talk bad about white people, so why don't we have the right? And in that sense, how don't we have the right to, say, use racial slurs or talk against women's rights? We should have that right. That has also become a very important debate, because what are the limits of freedom, and should those, more importantly, is it enough to address them legally? Is it enough to address them through law? how can we, because we have learned more and more as right has confiscated our struggle and of freedom and somehow given it a racist and sexist content. We have come to recognize that it's not enough that we have pursued equal rights. It's not enough because suddenly we find ourselves in positions where we call for the state or for the law to interfere and to protect us. And yet, until now, we were fighting against their restrictions. So what are we going to do with this dilemma? And another, of course, awful example is what's happening in Hungary right now. These homosexual free spaces that are emerging everywhere in Hungary. Suddenly communities arguing for their cultural freedom and spatial freedom and local freedom. And once again, this has always been a kind of demand, local freedom, local autonomy on the side of the oppressed. And suddenly what we see is people on the right, white communities dominated by men, are using the same arguments we have made in order to, like cultural freedom, and say we have a free will, we should have the right to produce and reproduce ourselves autonomously, and so we want no gay people, no lesbian people, no transsexuals in the spaces where we live. And what we find is Hungarian government is allowing this. So these examples, I'm hoping, are showing you how complicated the concept of freedom is, and how it is impossible that to address freedom without having a debate on public good, especially maybe bringing a fourth dimension, a fourth dilemma into all this. What about the freedom? What about the rights of animals? What about the freedom of nature? So what about entities in the world? Okay, living things, or sometimes even unliving things like buildings, like archaeological sites. If they do have no will, does it mean that we can do whatever we want to with them? So does free will only belong to human beings? Can we address questions of ecology, questions of space through an understanding of freedom as free will and autonomy? Or should we have an understanding of freedom that is different, that also somehow becomes or gets involved with the relation, gets involved with the idea of public good and the rights, or the right, I shouldn't say right, because right is always attached to individuals normally. So what about again ecology? What about cities? What about spaces? Because even when we talk about cities, when we talk about ecology, we have to bring the human and her human will, and we cannot, debate these things in liberal societies without making a reference to the will of the human being, for example, who wants to protect nature. But we don't have an understanding of nature as an entity, that also needs its freedom. So how are we going to address these dilemmas? And as I said, these are very, very difficult, debates. What other dilemmas do we have? Well, another one is it really enough to have the horizon of our struggle limited by the right to have freedom as much as other people, that is, being equally free? Well, increasingly we see that this is not enough at all for another reason, and that is because we want to have the freedom to imagine a different world. So it's not about, we, for example, I don't know, as Blacks want to have the same rights as white people, or we as third people want to have our independent states like other nations. We should be free in our nation state, and we should have our nation state like other people have. It's not about the right of lesbian or gay couples to have children and to get married, etc. We want to imagine other forms of embodiment. We want to imagine other possible worlds. We want to be able to imagine a world without states, for example, and this will bring me to the Kurdish issue. We want to imagine a world where we can refuse work, for example. We can talk about, we can open up areas where it's not work that dominates human relations, but it's play. So there are, in other words, how can we not only have enough freedom like other people, dominating people, but how can we also bring those people, mobilize those people into new imaginations? How can we have the freedom to imagine the world anew? And as I said, this is a current dilemma because all over the world since 2010, people thought that after neoliberalism, there will be, communities will disappear, everybody is going to somehow be assimilated into relations of commodity, cultures will be commodified, individual organs will be commodified, and the whole world will transform itself into a market, and there will be no space for imagination. But what we see is the contrary. Since 2010, since neoliberalism came, and of course the nation state came to this moment of crisis, and brought capitalism to a crisis too, we've seen all over the world, in Brazil, in of course in Kurdistan, in the whole Middle East, in South America, in Asia, in Hong Kong today, in Lebanon, in all these places, people coming together in streets, people coming together as collectivities in spaces, not only to ask for equal rights, but they are coming together body to body, touching each other, forming new friendships, forming new imaginations, and screaming, we don't want to continue living like this, right? Black people don't want to continue. They are saying everywhere, they are saying, we don't want, equal, for example, rates of imprisonment. We want the abolishment of prisons. And we want to think about, we want to be free to pursue this ideal and to get into contact with other communities all around the world to be able to imagine a world without prisons. So that's another example. Okay, now I am arguing, and I'm sure many of our friends who are listening to these webinars already know, the Kurdish freedom movement, since the beginning of its formation, and especially for the Kurdish movement, this idea of freedom has been crucial. Imagine you are coming from a patriarchal society, you are joining the Kurdish movement as a woman, and you are entering conditions where there's a fight against the state, and you can maybe imagine to forming a collective will of Kurdish people through the struggle. But how can you be free as a woman without knowing yourself, when you have been bound with definitions of womanhood that have been handed to you down by society and man? So they figured out very quickly that what stands on their way is not only the state. And when you get rid of, when you escape certain limitations, that does not make you achieve freedom. You need to labor for freedom. You need to move for freedom. You need an effort to know yourself, to know what you want, living within a collectivity. And this is, as I said, this doesn't come automatically to a person, but it only happens through effort. It doesn't happen when restraints are lifted. It happens through organized debate. Well, so that was what brought women to thinking about all these things. And together, and Öcalan, Abdullah Öcalan, who is the leader of PKK, was the leader of the Kurdish freedom movement, has addressed these concerns, has responded to women and to women's struggle by forming or by giving certain clues on how to form a women's liberation ideology together with women. So I will, for example, I mean, what are the questions that we have? If we are fighting in a struggle as women, what are the questions that face us in terms of freedom, and how do those questions bring us to a search for a different kind of understanding of freedom that is liberal and addresses your concerns about thinking or your need to imagine new things. Well, one of the thing is, when we talk about, I started this, although I forgot the name, I started this talk by giving you the example of Prometheus. Well, Prometheus has been an important figure and in mythology, but there are so many figures like Prometheus, individual heroes we commemorate, we appreciate, and we talk about when we talk about freedom. Like, for example, again, in Black movement, Rosa Parks. You know, she has, despite all the restrictions and despite the legal rules that forced women, Blacks to sit in the back of the bus, she said no. I mean, she didn't get up. She didn't give her place to a white person. And afterwards, a civil rights movement was started. So we have, when we talk about freedom, interestingly enough, we always talk about individual heroes who somehow achieved their will. And by achieving their will, they opened up venues for us. Well, that's only partially true, right? I mean, what about all those people and all those individuals, all those heroic, but all those individuals and people we don't know by name, we don't call them heroes, but yet they have given a heroic struggle, survival struggle, and they have transmitted their stories, their dreams to us. For example, in the Kurdish movement, the mothers who have transmitted the Kurdish language, despite all the Turkish state's efforts to assimilate, to destroy, to commit linguicide against Kurdish people, what about them? So society, in a sense, is not something that limits people only, okay? It's not, the story is not adequate if we tell it in terms of heroes that go against norms, heroes against social sanctions, heroes that go against law. Actually, societies are opening, or societies are enabling freedom. They have their own ways of enabling freedom by exercising self-defense, by exercising somehow a non-visible will, and inheriting, you know, some of their cultures, some of their stories to other generations. So Kurdish women and Abdullah Öcalan, of course, have started thinking about freedom in those terms, as in terms of collectivity, not individual, not heroes, but as collectivities. How do we already pursue and exercise freedom, and how can we, as collectivities, achieve more freedom through labor, through effort, through investing in ourselves? So the next question that comes with it is then, society's freedom is not the sum of individuals' free will. It's not the sum of the free wills of different individuals. No, there is another rule operating in society, another way in which societies, social entities claim freedom and autonomy. So there is a need to theorize that as well. And finally, what was for women and for Abdullah Öcalan very important, given the initial patriarchal reactions that they have faced within the movement, freedom cannot be delayed. It's not going to come once we have the revolution. It's not going to come. We have to put labor and effort, invest in ourselves in order to achieve freedom right now and here, within our struggles, here and now, in our daily life, in our struggles. How are we going to exercise freedom? That has, of course, emerged as a really important question. Now, as I understand, there have been, and I'm sure people with their feedback will further, I'm hoping, will further elaborate on that, or maybe bring other aspects to it. Just let me zip water. Well, there are, I think, three ideas in Kurdish freedom, women's freedom movement we have to understand in order to appreciate the link between freedom and organization. The first one of this is in one of his books. For example, Öcalan says that what is more free than light? Light, movement. You cannot restrict, right, the movement of light. The light will flow. So flow and mobility, change and transformation in terms of space, in terms of course, internal consciousness. These are these are crucial aspects of experiencing freedom now, here and now. And that cannot be done without forming an organization. I mean, you can go around the city, you can, travel from city to city, but that's as an individual, and we hear individuals doing this in order to attain freedom, but there is the question of society. Remember, I've just talked about that a minute ago. How about social freedom? How about freedom of societies? And how about realizing freedom as mobility collectively, how to sustain it? And that cannot be done without organizations, because organizational meetings, organizational ideologies, organizational obligations, organizational relationships that friendships that organizations enable are what breaks the daily routine of capitalism, the daily routine of patriarchy, the daily routine of nation state. We are continuously shaped and reshaped by the demands of these systems of domination. And in order to fight against these systems, it's not, and you cannot achieve individually without a heroic stance, let's say, the conditions or the restrictions that patriarchal and state laws and racial laws are exercising on us. We have to organize, but there's a catch here. We have to also continuously change and revolutionize our organizations. So an organization, once again, remember that freedom is not something given. It needs to be achieved. It needs to be constantly labored on. It's we need to constantly spend effort in order to achieve freedom. So it needs, so in order to have mental and physical motion, we have to build organization. Building cannot be stopped at some point, but we need to build other organizations, engage with organizations elsewhere. And that's why you see, for example, in Kurdish women's movements and in general in Kurdish movement, building and rebuilding organizations, transforming organizations, their names, their relations is a constant in their search for freedom as mobility and as change. That's my first point. So how motion and mobility is related to organizations. The second one is you cannot be free, and that's an axiom that Kurdish freedom movement and women's movement always uses, which is very important and to me, very guiding to me, is you cannot have freedom without meaning making and meaning giving. So you can only a movement, I mean, a travel, a movement, a motion of an internal, a mental or physical motion cannot be freeing until you give new meanings to it. So in order, of course, for a collectivity to develop the capacity for meaning making, you have to first liberate and disconnect yourself from hegemonic sets of meanings. So we have to, question what meaning does society give women, how is women defined in society, but also how how we define women and how we can come up with new definitions of women, how can we give meaning to our own practices, because most of the time we forget the whole process of meaning giving. Meanings are already given for us and we internalize them, we perform them, or otherwise we are so busy, we don't open up a space for ourselves to generate new meanings. And that can once again happen only in organizational settings. And giving meaning to contemporary is also not enough. It is necessary to produce explanations, stories, meanings that where people can recognize themselves, their tradition, and their experiences. They can feel like, okay, when I give meaning to this history, I become the subject of this history. I am the maker of this history. And to the extent that I see myself as a maker of history, that's how I become free. Well, to give an example, and that has been talked about in the webinars before this one, the whole historical interpretation of Kurdish women's movement, the Neolithic age, provides women with the means to give their meaning to their own lives, to their mother stories, to women's memories, to the myths and tales that people keep talking about, to the suffering and resilience women have shown throughout history. And this, only after that, we are, or not after that, in the process of developing these ideas, we suddenly feel like we are now situated in a holistic and sense-making world. And when things make sense, that is in a sense, also freedom. Another example of the Kurdish freedom movement could be, for example, how they have disconnected themselves from scientific knowledges that are handed down to us as truths, right? How can we, as oppressed people, as oppressed women, build a science where women's languages are spoken, where we speak women's vocabulary, right? Where we give meaning to history, to nature, where we give meaning to our friendships, to our relations, etc. So the whole, disconnecting yourself, I mean, being free also involves, as I said, separating yourself, disconnecting yourself from hegemonic meanings, but also from the knowledge that patriarchal so-called patriarchal so-called sciences develop about our bodies. For example, who am I as a woman? What do I call my sexual organs? How do I receive my body? How do I give meaning to my monthly cycles, etc.? I need to develop my own ways of knowing, and that has to happen again in an organizational setting. Well, the third aspect is the fact that neither movement nor we have to see that neither motion movement nor developing an capacity to give meaning, although necessary, are going to be enough for being free. Freedom also involves that we increase our power to actively build things. I mean, how many times as women we have felt, we have been made to feel inadequate, and because we were unable to build things, we didn't have the know-how of certain things, or how our women felt disempowered by because men have monopolized the practice of medicine and have dominated it with patriarchal knowledges. So what the third thing is, we have to develop a capacity to build new things. So again, with the things that are given to us, freedom cannot mean I do what I want to do. I want to be able to want new things and to imagine new things. And that can only happen when I invest in my capacity to build things, which brings me once again to the idea that freedom necessitates immense effort, immense willpower, so that a person pushes herself to overcome her limits, to go against her own habits, and labor and invest energy in herself and her relationships. So increasing your physical capacity, acquire new information, acquire new skills that predominantly circulate among men. This, of course, also shows how freedom is something that can only achieve in collectivity, because I can build my capacity. I can build my I can increase my capacity to build things by acting collectively, right? Building things or imagining new things never happens when one is alone. It always happens when you are at least two, right? So we are talking about the multiplicity, the freedom of multiplicities, the freedom of pluralities, because otherwise there is no freedom that, or no way of giving meaning, no way of increasing your capacity to build without having a collectivity and without, of course, instituting motion in your life through organizations. Now, I want to come to the end because I'm sure, or I'm hoping that you have questions. I want to come to an end by a maybe provocative way that always at least has provoked me when Kurdish movement did that. That is bringing love and freedom together. Can we ever conceptualize freedom without love? Love in so many cultures and in so many societies, love actually has been seen as a strong emotion that drives people to things that are forbidden to them. Individuals recognize there are all these narratives of love stories, right? Where individuals recognize their core values and identity through love and rebel against structures that oppress and dominate them. But in the end of these stories, happiness has always been achieved when a person can harmonize and create a balance between her love and social norms. And capitalist modernity tells us that such a balance, the balance between love and freedom and happiness, can only be achieved when we live through marriage, in nuclear families, through ownership, through citizenship. And it seems like once these are attained, then people run out of a story to tell. Well, love takes a different conceptualization in Kurdish movement, again related to freedom and truth. But this love is not a form of love. I mean, and it always reminds us this idea of love. I mean, this linking, close linkage between love and freedom, that we have to be always at least two, even in ourselves. We cannot love as individuals, and we cannot be free as individuals. We have to always be more than individuals, but also understand that love cannot be consummated through sexuality, cannot be contained by household, cannot be tamed by property and nation, and is not bring us not to freedom through the reproduction of lineage. And here comes the whole idea of ecology, nature, animals, and buildings, because love is only lived freely when it directs itself to nature, to the world, to revolution, to all people, living matter. And so, in other words, in all kinds of relationships. And that is only how movement and flow can be achieved, and how people can collectively imagine new worlds, unlock new secrets, acquire new sensibilities. So a free individual, as far as I understand from the Kurdish movement, and as I said, this has always been a provocation for me and a very important lesson, guidance. You achieve love and freedom together only when you lose yourself in nature, in fellow humans, in society, and most importantly, in rebellion, in construction and imagination. And that is how you achieve an elevated state, if you want. Okay, I would like to finish my talk with these sentences, if that's okay, and give the floor to you, Bishek.
Yeah, it was really amazing. Thank you very much, Nazan. I really enjoyed what you said, especially the last part was really nice to say that freedom is deeply connected with love and harmony and happiness, that you need for one to happen, you need the other things too. And it was really interesting for me personally to see the Kurdish women's movement from this philosophical perspective that you just gave. And we also have questions for you. I personally have one question, which I just thought about, especially like because the Kurdish women's movement, or like the Kurdish movement in general is often criticized for being hierarchical and to not have like flat structures. But at the same time, the idea is to have a free society, or more freer society than we have certainly here, especially by people here in the West, like from the West. And I would be interested in your thoughts about the different perspectives on freedom, since there is different images of freedom in different places of the world. And especially this critique on the movement. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I have been my first political formation has been in the feminist struggle in Turkey, and I have also been I have encountered these kinds of criticisms that have been voiced by feminists to Kurdish women. But I deeply disagree. I think there might be, and I'm not going to talk about here military hierarchies, because I am not familiar with it. And I'm sure maybe another friend who might want to comment on that, because I'm not familiar with it. But within the other parts of the struggle, women have these autonomous, women have created many autonomous spaces as women, for women, where they participate equally into this meaning making and capacity enhancing processes. What, for example, has always amazed me is, is like, I have never heard, I will give you an example of Jin TV, actually, okay, where I work. Jin TV is the Kurdish women's television. And when we started Jin TV, it was very difficult for us, because as women, there are such few women who have been trained in the technical aspects of visual media. Most women have been used as faces of television, not as technical, not so much involved in technical spheres. But now, after 2 years, because we have created this autonomous women's space, all of the women who work there can do montage, and can do uplink, can do all these technical aspects of, can realize all these technical as producing, editing, regie, camera, and we feel ourselves so empowered. Is there no hierarchy? There is division of labor. And in that division of labor shifts, that division of labor transforms, but there are people who are spokespeople of the television, and they are maybe higher, we can consider them to be hierarchically above in terms of having the right to represent the television. But otherwise, what makes me feel so free in Jin TV is the fact that there is no professionalization, and as women, without any need of man, we have learned all these different skills, and any of us can run a television anytime they give us there's a television. That's for me freedom.
Thank you very much for this answer. And I will read the question of one person. There are 2 questions. One is, can you please tell us more about freedom and self-defense? And the second question is, what is genealogy's role in organizing freedom?
Okay, so I start with the second one because I think I have started replying to that question. Genealogy, I mean, think about, I'm just going to be sincere, right? This is women's space, so I'm going to be a little bit intimate and sincere. You know, I've been trained in academia, and I have always, I had to always deal with the concepts academia has developed in terms of how gender is defined, how women are defined. And it empowers you extremely when you disconnect yourself from those concepts and you acquire a self-confidence in a collective environment where you can develop your own concepts and your own understanding of history. I think what genealogy does is exactly that. It disconnects itself, I mean, not in an uninformed way, in an informed, intentional way. It disconnects itself from sciences that have defined women and gender and world history and nature and so on, and says, okay, we are going to now, as a collectivity, develop our own concepts based on our experience, based on the stories that our mothers have told us, based on the mythologies which have excited us so deeply, based on our own struggle. We are going to develop new concepts. And when we are developing these concepts, we are not going to differentiate between physics and anthropology and sociology and feminism. We are going to look to the world as a holistic way, because an individual can feel free only when she understands the world completely, in a complete manner. Okay, and genealogy for me, in that sense, is that's why it practices freedom. When it comes to self-defense, remember, or in Turkish feminism and in Western feminism, actually, the slogan of women have been my body, my identity, my labor, right? I exercise, saying that what I do at home is work and labor, God damn it. It's not because of love, it's labor. You cannot talk about my sexuality, God damn it, because it's my sexuality. This is extremely important. But what Kurdish freedom movement have brought into this debate is self-defense, because they are saying, first of all, we are women as collectivities, and we might have individual bodies, but these bodies, if we talk about them in terms of possession, my body, right? It's somehow still speaks within the commodity-centered discourse of Western capitalist modernity. So instead of saying my identity, you know, I claim it, damn it, it's very important, but collectively defending ourselves from those who are trying to confiscate from us the means to reproduce autonomously. Because as women, they have confiscated from us our knowledge, they have confiscated from us our means of labor, our means to be happy. So we want them back. And we want to, when we take them, we also want to defend it. That's the kind of feminism and freedom that Kurdish women's movement is proposing.
Thank you very much. I will just read out the next question, if that's okay. The idea of horizontal organizing is great. However, our experience is that this opens us up to political takeover. How do we find the balance so that we can keep our politics but encourage participation? And thank you.
Oh, is this a question or is this an answer to the previous question? Because that's how I hear it. It's a great answer to the previous question.
It was sent to me as a question, actually, but maybe it now fits to what you said previously. I don't know.
Yeah, because it's a horizontal, yes, horizontal participation, building horizontal assemblies, etc., are very important. But on the other hand, there are certain ways in which, for example, you need representation. Representation always involves hierarchy. And why do you need representation in contemporary world? Because contemporary world understands your politics only in terms of demands. They don't have another ear. That's what they can only hear. They don't understand other ways of imagining. So once you are, you must do horizontal, you must have horizontal organizations, but you must also have the structures which address the world, right? Which can act in the world so that it can be heard, it can be understood. And it's a dialectic. There is not a very easy solution to it. And Kurdish movement is continuously grappling with this dialectic, I would say.
Okay, I have no more questions actually. I don't know if we should wait if there is more questions, but for myself, I think you said quite a lot. Thank you very much for that. I just thought about one very famous sentence, and then I had to Google who said it actually, about no one is free until we are all free. It's
Yeah.
by Martin Luther King. Yeah. Just like it's the sentence which appears everywhere, but I actually forgot from who it was. Yeah, I had to think about that. Nazan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to say some closing words?
No. I'm just very happy with these webinars. So I'm thanking all
Yeah.
the organizers.
Yeah, me too. I also thank everybody. Yeah, it was really incredible the last times, and especially today for myself. I am honored that I could moderate this session with you. And from my side, I say goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, Nazan.